The idea that you can machine learn your way out of anything is even a misnomer because you got to pick out certain features or variables and weight them differently. So it's just a cautionary tale.
Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from Internet of Things thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host,
Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight. I'm joined today by Dan Yarmoluk and Craig Truempi from Atek Access Technologies. So Dan is Director of Business and Development for IoT and Analytics. Craig is Director of Business Development for IoT Reliability. They're both gentlemen with a deep background in fields such as condition monitoring, predictive maintenance. We're going to dig into this area of the industrial IoT in particular. As usual, we're going to take the podcast, number one, looking at the company itself. Number two, digging into the technology and in particular, looking at where the technology is taking us in the coming 3 to 5 years. And then looking at some customer cases and digging into how these solutions are deployed. But before we get into the company, Craig and Dan, give me a bit more background into yourselves, where you're coming from, and how you ended up in these roles.
This is Dan. It's a pleasure to be here, Eric. Well, I've been selling mobile or components into the mobile industry for a decade or so. So when you're designing batteries and components into mobility products, you're obviously touching IoT in some fashion or another. So that's where my background comes post MBA. Now it's full-fledged into the industrial IoT solutions.
And this is Craig. My background has been in industry for 20-some years. I initially started as a coder or a systems engineer around systems in mining, paper, power, all heavy industry. And over the years, I moved into really the solutions architect, the business development, and then into condition monitoring, particularly focused on rotating equipment and working to reduce risk and increase reliability in these industrial plants.
I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but I was visiting Predix today over in their office in Shanghai. I think it's a interesting solution that they're taking to the market, although it's very early stage. But give me a high level perception of where we are today in terms of bringing some machine learning, some more advanced analytics versus using algorithms written by people that have a good understanding of relatively static systems. Where do you see us being today in the markets that you're working in?
I think the way you frame the question is spot on, Eric. I mean, the algorithms for static equipment as it goes in yesteryear is pretty tried and true, and it's into the control system and the SCADA of the PLC. The question is with when we're pushing the envelope, machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, algorithms, predictive analytics, is that most of the people that have that kind of computer science background lack the domain knowledge that a guy like you can understand, Craig, has. So if you're going to pick features or variables, or you have to understand industrial machinery, you have to be able to model that data based upon your extensive knowledge of it. The idea that you can machine learn your way out of anything is even a misnomer because you got to pick out certain features or variables and weight them differently. So it's just a cautionary tale. So I think we're at the beginning of that road, Eric, to your question, and we have a long way to go, but it's very promising.
And I can add to that. I mean, I think there's room for machine learning and the computers to really augment and then move ahead of what we're doing as humans today. But I think it's the collaboration of technology and the knowledge in the domain that's in a position near term to really accelerate how we solve problems.
So let me give a quick overview of Atek for the listeners, and then we can go into a bit more. And in particular, where are you coming from, and then how does IoT play into the development? So Atek has 4 business lines. So there's DataKey that's providing rugged portable memory solutions. There's Larco that provides presence sensing mats, wall switches, safety controls for automatic door and industry safety. TankScan is for light industrial wireless tank monitoring. And then the fourth is AssetScan, which is a complete platform for monitors, hardware, software, data analytics that connects OEM industrial products to the IoT. Atek is a medium-sized company, less than 200 employees, if I'm right. Correct me if I'm not. And it's based in Minnesota. So you could say in the industrial heartland. Is that kind of a fair summary right now? Is there anything crucial I missed?
No, it's just that the ownership has a foundry, so they make a bunch of aluminum casted parts, and then they also had a plastics division that did contract manufacturing for the medical device industry. So these other technology brands that you found, these four assets, are little baby brands compared to their old manufacturing history.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's what I'm interested in. This is it's a company with a long history, and now it's moving, you could say, into the future. Where do you play? Are both of you covering these four brands? Are you also involved in the legacy businesses?
No, we are squarely focused in that asset scan and industrial IoT solution. So even, tank scan is another gentleman, but, Craig and I have developed the product and rolled it out, asset scan, which we'll get into predictive analytics for rotating equipment.
So then maybe we can dig a bit more into asset scan. And how did this emerge as a product out of this company that, yeah, as you said, is dealing in some pretty traditional heavy industries previously?
Well, it's serendipitous, right? You had the tank scan, which is a tank monitoring. It's just simply giving alerts. If an above ground fuel tank, has a certain low level, it'll send an alert so that the trucker does not have to do a manual gauge, and it'll save on that distributed asset and transportation costs. So asset scan was born out of we created this hard piece of hardware that does this, and then a couple of OEMs said, hey, if you could sense this, could you try to sense, for example, differential pressure? And then we would private label that solution for an OEM equipment manufacturer. With that being said, this kind of hardware configuration was relatively open, and we could add other things to it. So when Craig and I met, Craig was working in a different organization, and he approached us for a solution. I looked at the market, and of course, industrial IoT is the lion's share, and then predictive analytics. And then if you want to go into predictive analytics in process and discrete, and even utility, you're going to start looking at, what's the lion's share of that equipment, and it's legacy equipment and pumps and fans and motor when we say roller element bearings. So there's a big market there. And then Craig had a gigantic amount of reliability engineering domain expertise with that. So we were able to embed our technology and get the right readings, which will later go into machine learning and data science later, Eric. But that's how we came to this spot today.
Earlier, you mentioned that machine learning is somewhat of a misnomer, in that the algorithms are fairly intelligent, but there's still a lot of human direction. You have to have the kind of OT knowledge behind to help guide the IT. Asset scan, I understand that it's a fairly flexible technology, but to what extent are you focused on still specific verticals, specific types of equipment versus having a platform that can extend across kind of horizontally across any industrial asset?
What we're focused on is rotating equipment. And one of the significant measurements we take to get the insight of the health and condition of the rotating equipment, whether it's a turbine generator to a pump to a fan to a compressor, in all orientations, vertical, horizontal, fast or slow vibration, and in the context of high frequency vibration or ultrasonic are really the leading indicators. And then we can couple that with the pressures, inlet and discharge pressures of this equipment as well. But our focus is the rotating equipment. And when we look at that, we feel that does cut across the horizontals in many industries.
And it makes a lot of sense to focus on a specific type of industrial equipment instead of a particular vertical, because end of the day, that's what your study is, right? It's the study of this piece of equipment. You're serving primarily the American market, or are you also in Europe, in Asia, other markets?
We are predominantly in North America. However, we can work with distributors or anyone that sees a use case where they would really want to acquire this technology or expertise. We're certainly willing. It's just we're here, and it's market, it's commercialization and uptake and awareness, and that demands time.
Where do you see that in the US then? Because in China, I would say on the one hand, there's a tremendous amount of hype. The government is kind of jumping on board now. But in terms of, you talk to a GM of a medium-sized factory, and unless they're getting, some subsidized loans to purchase equipment, it's difficult for them to understand the business case simply because the technology is new. It's somewhat out of their scope. And so difficult for them to make confident investment decisions in IoT technology at this point. Where are we in the U.S. and who are the markets that you feel are mature or ready for this type of solution?
Well, Craig, I would like Craig to talk a little bit of the history of predictive maintenance, and when we talk about preventative or predictive maintenance in a digital factory, to give some context to what maintenance managers do today, because I think it's a evolution of the smart factory, and it's not just a cultural thing. It's like, so Craig, can you get into that?
Sure. I think that across different industries, there's different people that just have that mentality of, doing it the same old way isn't going to work today. And there's people in these industries that are underperforming, or they have leadership that has a desire to continually improve and are driving that culture shift in their organization, particularly as their demographics shift. And so maybe to get off direction a little bit from where you're going, Dan, but the payback and how do people get started here is when they have an event, an unplanned failure of a rotating piece of equipment that causes them downtime and risk. And in those situations, they are top management through mid-management are interested and eager in understanding what can we do to avoid that in the future. And so I think that in those cases, that's been a short time window to get from what we have to offer to deployment, to give them information about the health of their asset so they avoid this unplanned outage or downtime in the future.
Craig, can you say, what does the typical mini mill or small manufacturer do? Do they run to what? They run
to failure. I mean, vibration monitoring has been around for a long time, quite frankly. It's evolved significantly in the last few years, and most people don't know how it's changed. And so what's happening in these plants today is they have a guy go around, either in-house or outsourced guy, take a monthly reading across their machines to look at early warning of oncoming faults. And what they're finding is when they take a monthly route, although that's can be successful, it's highly dependent on the individual taking that information. The individual takes that information, he leaves the site, and then he provides a report. There's a delay to that. And the maintenance manager is in this unique position of taking a recommendation from a maintenance person on what they should do with their equipment, whether they should run it or look at repairing it prior to a catastrophic failure. The problem is they simply don't have the competence or the understanding or enough information. Taking a data sample once a month and trying to make a decision whether to take that piece of equipment offline or not is really difficult for these maintenance managers or operations managers to come together that this is timely to take the operation down. So, what we're looking at, The Verge, is with IoT is making the frequency of the data more available, as well as the visibility. And then combined with that, getting to a consistent, simple view of this, similar to how they run their plant today with alert management.
So, Eric, when you think about when we ponder this in the IoT world, where's the value? When first was run to fail. Then if they were more proactive, they do preventative maintenance routes. Every quarter, typically, they go in and rip out this big OEM and do like an oil change. Now, what we're saying is the value is we can put this agnostic piece of equipment, battery powered, no cables, no infringing on the current IT system, outside of the SCADA and the PLC, outside of the control, to give some more older assets some intelligence. And instead of getting data once a quarter, one data point, you're going to get 24 data points a day. So if you look at it, in one day, you're getting more than 6 years of quarterly reports. And that's where you can mitigate these outliers and this downtime and this efficiency. Another thing to contextualize here, at least in North America, is the infrastructure is 1950s infrastructure. The OT, operational technology, demographic is retiring, and this equipment's getting older. So the only thing they can do is work smarter because the investments aren't coming for all these new gigantic plants. It's legacy equipment. So it's really about adding intelligence to more equipment at a cost-effective price, and but Eric, your first question about like where are we? There's a lot of cultural clashes. There's a lot of generational clashes, and manufacturing kind of evolution, right? So we were in lean, and we were in, when you go into these factories as well, realize it's like a ghost town. You have all these assets, and there's not that many people manning them because they've got it to be this productive level. But with that being said, there's a lot of risk out there.
Walk through a little bit of who is a typical customer. And I don't mean kind of we've covered the industry to an extent, but which type of stakeholder would you meet and feel like this is a person that's in a situation where they're able to understand what we're working with. Their organization is in a position. So if we look at, for example, what capabilities do they need in terms of sensing equipment already in operations? What do they need from an IT perspective in terms of having some competence in their organization? And then who's the right person to speak with, the right seniority level and so forth, in terms of kind of where are we in terms of the strategic versus the tactical nature of this solution from the procurement or the decision making perspective.
I think one of the things that we are doing today is we, to your point, to this mid-tier industry, we're creating the opportunity. So we're finding the customers that had an unplanned event and or a piece of equipment that they suspect is a problem, but they don't know what to do. And these situations are out there all the time. It's rare that we run into a plant that everything is running perfect. And so we find the personality or the guy, whether it's maintenance manager, whether it's a plant manager, that's just dissatisfied with how things are running and wants to find a way to get control over how his plant is running. It is in these situations that we can deploy using the IoT structure. Really simplifies how we can move that data. So Dan had alluded to earlier that our system bypasses the OT and IT, goes directly to the cloud. So in terms of the needs for IT or OT, we're simplifying that in how we deploy and moving the information directly to the cloud in an IoT fashion. We're moving it there so it can drive alerts via email or text outs to appropriate people and provide visibility across the organization. So the maintenance manager and the operations manager and the plant manager can be aware of this, especially during the initial phases of a project, so they all can be on board with what type of information is coming in and how actionable is it.
My background is a little bit of management consulting, and many cases we'd walk into a company and do an analysis on cost structure, and often it was more or less assumed that a particular cost structure was given, and then you'd start looking at some of the easy things or the perceived kind of easy money if you want to maybe hit profit targets for a coming year. But a lot of the big value was in machines that were bottlenecks and that would go down periodically. And it was always interesting to me that, I'm not from a technical background, but we'd often be working with manufacturing engineering departments and people that are quite technical, but they often, I believe, have a bit of a tunnel vision on the technologies that they've been working with in the past 10 years. And if none of those technologies solve the problem, then it's assumed to be just a problem that you have to live with. And of course, now we're moving into an area where new technologies are coming to market and they might be able to solve some of these problems. But it's a bit of an awareness issue. At least that's my perception. So I can understand why you say, you're kind of finding the situations and then to an extent educating companies on new solutions and how you can start to address some of these problems that people have been maybe frustrated with, but living with to an extent.
Well, you're really right, Eric. I mean, when you think about it, and Craig, you can add to this, manufacturing is like command and control, conservative, don't deviate from the norm. In terms of discrete or process, right? It has to be perfect. And with that, there's no alterations to that process or command control system. Now we're getting in a new world that's beyond that. So there's a cultural thing and familiarity with technology for sure. And look, in the context of this whole thing, humanity can't keep up with the level and pace of technology and absorb it at all. So we have to overlay that on top of what we're throwing on the manufacturers. And, we have everything, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, nano diagnostic. I mean, it just keeps going on, and people don't have, they have a day job, right? The other thing to think about, Eric, too, is like, at least I ponder this, is how do we deliver this technology so they can consume it? What's the right consumable? Because if we think a plant manager is going to be sitting like you and I in front of several computers, just ingesting data and knowing how to action it, I think that's a misnomer. I think that we have to find ways to deliver the solution even better and quite honestly integrate into the workflow. So with that being said, Craig and I have been working with a lot of channel partners because we think the play is for the channel or the service providers to augment their offering with a connected product so that they can have continuous monitoring and a new revenue stream and new added value to the customer, as opposed to throwing that whole burden onto the end user itself.
That's a good point, Dan. I wanted to just elaborate on that a little bit. And we talked about the visibility of the data to the plant manager and maintenance managers and operations manager. And I just wanted to, I can't overstate how much this impacts and improves the situation. So prior to coming to Atek, we had installed similar installations, not to the internet, but into the internal intranet. And the data was getting to the maintenance person, but it wasn't getting to operations. It wasn't getting to plant management. And the maintenance people didn't really understand. They understood there was an alert. They understood there was a problem, but it wasn't in their daily job to make decisions about running equipment. And so the information wasn't getting to the right people. It wasn't creating this collaborative decision making. And so, if we looked at, and Dan, what you were touching on, I think, is there's a human component to this decision making that needs to get tied out to this machine learning and or these alerts. It's this visibility of the data that we're recognizing when we bring the data right out to the internet, that everybody has access to, that they can set the alerts to the broader team as they get up and running. And they can bring in remote expertise, the subject matter experts on these pieces of equipment to help the plants improve their decision making and what to do with all the intelligence coming from the sensors and the predictive analytics.
I agree. I think the human element is very central here. I was talking with a friend a few weeks ago. He's building a SaaS MES solution, and one of his competitors in China is building also a SaaS MES, but it's reliant on WeChat, right? Which WeChat's basically the Chinese version of WhatsApp, and it spreads the data through WhatsApp as a platform or through WeChat. And so you can imagine, hard to imagine American or a European company accepting this, right? That they're going to use basically this insecure communication app to manage their operating data. But end of the day, these are companies that are not particularly concerned with somebody accessing their data. They're small manufacturers that are producing relatively simple things. But what they really are concerned about is their people on the ground adopting the technology and being able to use the technology. And that's what they've accomplished with this. They've created something that everybody automatically has in their mobile phone. They know how to use it. They can communicate with each other with it. And it basically it solves the pain. Now it might not be something that we're gonna see in the American model, but American market anytime soon. But I think this is absolutely the point: is that these technologies have to be intuitive and they have to fit into people's habits. Otherwise, they won't be adopted.
Well, WeChat's a great example. It's a great technology. It's really usable. And you're right. In the United States, they don't use it nearly as much. But all the Chinese manufacturers that I still do stay in touch with, Eric, I mean, we're WeChatting all the time.
They're actually using WeChat as the baseline data platform for the MES.
So look, I mean, there's a couple of things with IoT security expert. I'm an advocate of blockchain, so we hear about that, but that's a big task to do. So with security, like we have to remember what is sensitive, as you're saying. What needs to be protected? If you want to know what my pump, these numbers are, you need to hack into that. I mean, I don't know if I'd be so offended at that one pump, but you don't want them getting into any sensitive intellectual property, nor processes or command and control systems. But, we have to also realize like what data do we want to capture and what can we action it on. So when I was speaking with one of the largest oil and gas companies, they have to make decisions in minutes. This data is being processed, in various different silos from underneath the earth, and then health and safety, and they have seconds. So just thinking capturing all the data or security, they have to be able to react for the health and safety of the environment, the planet, the people, and make that money to get the ROI from the oil and ground. So there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, so let's turn the conversation more to a deep dive into the technology. Before we do that, I want to quickly, before we do this transition, how can people learn more about Atek or get in touch with you?
Well, they can find Craig and Dan on LinkedIn for sure, and www.assetscan.com or www.atechcompanies.com. So we're very visible on LinkedIn, Twitter, all those things. You can find us.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoTONEHQ and check out our database of case studies at IoTONE.com. If you have an interesting project, we would love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@iotone.com.